This is Take 5 with Bentley, Nevada. Joining us again today is Chris McMillan, Senior Product Manager for Bentley, Nevada's sensor portfolio, and that includes the Ranger Pro wireless system. Chris, welcome back.
Good to be back.
What I'd like to do in this installment of the series, Chris, is talk a little bit about hazardous areas. Many customers that look into a wireless solution do it precisely because there's a hazardous area. They really don't want to send people into that area any more than necessary. And so for at least a certain percentage of customers, hazardous area approvals are an important must-have on the product. But before we talk about the approvals Ranger Pro carries, I'd like to maybe have you define for us, and we may have some people listening that don't know, what is a hazardous area and how are they classified?
Yeah, sure, you bet. So really there's two major classification schemes typically used, globally. One in North America and then another in Europe. And they're both very similar with very subtle differences, but they have the same intentions. So here in North America, you'll often hear a classification as well as a division. So the classifications are really in three categories: Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3. With Class 1 being, hey, this is an application where it is expected to have, combustible or flammable gases or vapors that can, be in sufficient quantities on a continuous basis, to spark. A Class 2, very similar. However, flammable gases or combustible dusts may only be present or expected to be present, but only for intermittent or short period of times. And then the last classification in North America is Class 3, and that's where this is a location where there has to be some sort of a fault, or it's not expected under normal operating conditions for any ignitable fibers or gases to be present, but it can occur underneath the fault conditions. So those are really the three in North America classes that come through. Their equivalents over in typically in Europe, you'll hear about ATEX or IECEX is one, but they go by a zoning system. Instead of Class 1, Div 1, Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, there's a Zone 0, Zone 1, as well as Zone 2. Very similar. Zone 0, just like a Class 1, this is where you've got concentrations of gases or vapors are expected to be present, and they are present either continuously or for longer periods of time. A Zone 0 area will be those areas similar to Class 2 where, again, you're expecting to see flammable gases or at least high enough concentrations that can spark, but this would be expected basically under intermittent time periods. And then the last zoning is Zone 2, where you've got these same type of gases or combustions coming through. It's not likely to occur. Typically that means there's some sort of fault, whether it's in the process or the system that would occur this, but it can occur, so therefore there's a Zone 2. That's in a high level. That's kind of the differences.
Yes, and thank you for that explanation, Chris. I think our listeners will find that helpful. So my takeaway from that is that a Zone 2 or a Division 2 approval is the least stringent. And as you go to these smaller numbers, a Div 1, for example, or a Zone 1 or a Zone 0, it's now becoming more stringent, and those approvals are more difficult to obtain because they have to basically provide a higher degree of safety. Would that be safe?
That is correct. So if you've got a product or a machine operating in these, more stringent zones or classes, the more safety precautions, the more difficult it becomes to meet those requirements.
Well, Chris, I appreciate those remarks. And what I think we will do, we've kind of defined, these terms and the areas. What we'll do is we'll save for our next episode a discussion of the approvals that Ranger Pro has and some of the considerations around that. So I want to say again, as we've said many times during this podcast series, thank you for joining us. And we'll have you back real soon.
Of course, wouldn't miss it.
You've been listening to Take 5 with Bentley, Nevada.